I'm telling you, Sarah, the man is made of ice, Ava whispered, leaning over the coffee machine like it held state secrets. The break room was empty, a rare moment of peace on a chaotic Tuesday. Did you hear about the marketing merger? He completely gutted their passion project. The team lead, Mark, was practically in tears, and Finch didn't even blink. He just stared him down, said the numbers didn't add up, and walked away. The man has no heart at all. Sarah's eyes were wide, hungry for every last detail. No way! I heard he was ruthless, but that's just cold. Cold, Ava scoffed, a bitter little laugh escaping her. Sarah, the man is a walking glacier. It's why his wife left him. You can't build a home with a guy who only knows how to build empires. Someone in accounts said the divorce was nasty. He tried to leave her with nothing, all because her family's business is a competitor. He's nothing but a calculator in a $1,000 suit. She took a sip of her coffee, the cheap bitterness a perfect match for her mood. It was a story stitched together from half-truths and office rumors, but it felt good to say it. It felt powerful, in a dark, unsatisfying way, to paint this picture of the untouchable CEO, Mr. Alastair Finch. It somehow justified her own feelings of being overlooked, of being just another cog in his giant machine. Suddenly, a heavy silence fell over the room, so thick it felt like the air had turned to cement. Sarah's eyes, which had been locked on Ava, shot to a spot just over Ava's shoulder. All the color drained from her face. A shadow had fallen over them, cool and imposing. Slowly, her heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm against her ribs, Ava turned. And there he was, Alastair Finch, not 10 feet away. He was holding a stark white ceramic mug, his knuckles pale. His face was a mask of unreadable calm, but his eyes, those piercing, glacial blue eyes she'd only ever seen from a distance, were fixed directly on her. He hadn't just walked in, he had been standing there. He had heard it. He had heard everything. The world seemed to tilt. The low hum of the office outside the break room faded to a dull roar. Every single terrible, exaggerated word she had just said echoed in the cavernous space of her mind. He took one slow, deliberate step forward. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't a roar of anger, but a quiet, chillingly precise whisper that cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Ava, my office, 3 p.m. The 3 hours between the break room and 3 p.m. were the longest of Ava's life. The second Mr. Finch turned and left, Sarah scrambled for an escape. "I have a spreadsheet," she stammered, before practically fleeing, leaving Ava alone with the ghost of her career. Ava stumbled back to her desk in a daze. The open-plan office, usually a comforting hive of activity, now felt like a coliseum with her in the center ring. Every quiet conversation seemed to be about her. Every person who walked by seemed to slow down, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. It was the first immediate consequence of gossip, the swift, silent social execution. Colleagues who would normally stop to chat now just gave tight-lipped nods. She was no longer Ava, the competent junior analyst. She was Ava, the girl who got caught. Her mind was a tornado of worst-case scenarios. She pictured herself being escorted out by security, a sad cardboard box in her arms. She imagined the humiliating exit interview, the permanent black mark on her resume. She had worked so hard to get here, to claw her way into a good job at one of the city's top firms, and she'd torched it all for a moment of petty slander. Just as a wave of nausea rolled over her, a plastic bottle of water was placed gently on her desk. She looked up and saw Daniel, a kind-faced analyst from the next department over. He wasn't looking at her with judgment, but with a quiet concern that was almost more painful than the scorn. "Drink this," he said softly, "and breathe. Just breathe." He didn't ask what happened. He didn't offer any empty platitudes. He just gave her a lifeline. In that moment, it was everything. But even his kindness couldn't stop the clock. At 2:59 p.m., with a heart that felt like a lead weight in her chest, Ava stood up and began the long, agonizing walk to the top floor, to the lion's den. The CEO's office was every bit as intimidating as the rumors claimed. A huge expanse of glass and polished chrome, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a godlike view of the city below. Alastair Finch was standing by that window with his back to her, a silhouette against the afternoon sun. "Close the door," he said, without turning. Ava did. The soft click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. She just stood there, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, waiting for the axe to fall. Finally, he turned around. The raw anger she expected wasn't there. Instead, she saw a profound weariness, a wounded look in his eyes that was far more unnerving. He gestured to one of the two chairs in front of his massive desk. "Sit down, Ava." She sat, perching on the very edge of the leather. He didn't take his own seat. He leaned against the front of his desk, creating an informal but still powerful barrier between them. "The numbers didn't add up," he began, throwing her own words back at her. "A calculator in a $1,000 suit. Was that your assessment?" Shame, hot and sharp, washed over her. "Mr. Finch, I am so sorry. It was unprofessional and cruel. There's no excuse." He held up a hand. "I'm not interested in an apology right now, Ava. I'm interested in the truth. You work in analytics. You, of all people, should care about accurate data. So, let's review your data points." He started pacing slowly. "First, the marketing merger. You're right, I cut their project. What the gossip mill failed to mention was that our parent company was about to dissolve that entire division in a redundancy restructure. By cutting the project and reallocating the team myself, I saved all 12 of their jobs. Mark wasn't in tears because I was heartless. He was in tears because he was grateful." Ava's stomach plummeted. "Second," he continued, his voice dropping, "my divorce." He stopped pacing and looked right at her. The weariness in his eyes was deeper now. "My wife didn't leave me because I'm a glacier. My ex-wife was diagnosed with a degenerative neurological disease 3 years ago. Her family's company, our supposed competitor, happens to be a world leader in experimental treatments for it. That brutal divorce was a legal shield. We transferred the bulk of our assets to her, insulated from my business, so she could fund her own care and research without it ever becoming a liability to this company. The ice-cold narrative, I let it happen. It was easier than explaining the truth. It protected her privacy from a world that feeds on tragedy." The air rushed out of Ava's lungs. The cartoon villain she had painted from whispers and rumors crumbled, revealing a man who was complex, burdened, and achingly human. "Gossip erodes trust, Ava. It doesn't just hurt the person you're talking about. It creates a culture of fear that damages the entire organization. It turns the workplace into a minefield." He walked back to his desk and picked up a file. He wasn't going to fire her. He was going to do something worse. "I'm not firing you," he said, as if he'd read her mind. "That would be too easy. You have a new project. I want a full report on how we can improve internal communication and build a culture of trust at this company. I want actionable strategies. I want you to understand this problem from the inside out. You have 1 month." It wasn't a punishment. It was a challenge, a terrifying, undeserved chance to make things right.
Leaving the CEO's office felt like stepping back into a world where the gravity had shifted. Ava felt hollowed out by her own shame and crushed by the weight of Mr. Finch's truth. The story she had spread so carelessly wasn't just false, it was a grotesque inversion of a private, painful sacrifice. In the days that followed, the consequences became brutally clear. The social cold shoulder was no longer subtle. An email chain for a new project, one she was perfectly qualified for, was forwarded to her team, but her name was suspiciously missing. When she asked her manager about it, he wouldn't meet her eyes. "We felt it required a high degree of interpersonal discretion," he mumbled. The accusation hung in the air between them. Lunch invitations stopped. Conversations died the moment she walked into the break room. She started eating at her desk, the quiet hum of her computer her only companion. The isolation was a tangible thing, a cold blanket of anxiety that settled over her each morning and didn't leave until long after she went home. It was during one of these lonely lunches that Daniel appeared again. He pulled up a chair and put his own sad-looking salad on her desk without a word. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then he said, "It's a lonely place, isn't it, the outside?" Ava looked up, confused. At my last job, he explained, a rumor started that I was getting special treatment because my uncle was on the board of a client company. It wasn't true. I'd never even met the guy. But it didn't matter. I was taken off projects, left out of meetings. People I thought were my friends started looking right through me. He sighed, the memory still clearly stinging. The loneliness was the worst part. I almost quit. Not just the job, but the whole industry. When you feel that isolated, it's hard to believe you belong anywhere. His story was a mirror of her own experience, but from the other side. He was the target. She was the one who pulled the trigger. He wasn't accusing her. He was offering empathy. He was the only person who didn't look at her like she was a monster. He just saw a person who had made a terrible mistake. This shared understanding became the foundation for something new. Daniel started staying late, pretending to work on his own projects, but really helping her with the report for Mr. Finch. He helped her turn it from a dry corporate assignment into a genuine exploration of empathy. Fueled by bad coffee and a growing camaraderie, they talked for hours about why people gossip, the insecurity, the desire to feel important, the simple boredom. He never excused what she did, but he helped her understand it. "You felt powerless," he said one night as they looked out over the glittering city from an empty conference room, "and spreading that story made you feel powerful for a second. It's just a broken way to get what we all really want, which is simply to be seen." Through these talks, Ava began to see a way forward. The shame was still there, but it was no longer a cage. It was becoming fuel. She realized her report couldn't just be about new policies. It had to be about people. It had to be about creating a place where listening was more important than talking. One evening, after they'd finished a tough section of the report, she turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for not walking away." He smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. Everyone deserves someone who stays. In that moment, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the deserted office, Ava felt the first flicker of something more than just gratitude. It was a connection born not from perfection, but from the messy, shared truth of being human.
This story is all about the power of words to tear us down and the power of honesty to build us back up. If you believe in second chances and the courage it takes to choose compassion over judgment, take a second to like this video and subscribe for more stories that get you thinking. Now, back to what happened next. The day of the quarterly all-hands meeting arrived. The big auditorium was buzzing with anticipation. On the screens, the theme was displayed: our corporate culture, building for the future. Ava sat in the back, her report submitted, her fate still hanging in the balance. Alistair Finch took the stage to polite applause. He started with the usual: revenue, market share, product launches. He was the CEO everyone saw, polished, confident, in control. But then he paused and set his notes aside. "Numbers are important," he began, his voice changing. He sounded less like a CEO and more like a man. "They tell us where we've been and where we're going, but they don't tell us how we get there. Our culture does that. And I've been thinking a lot about our culture, specifically about the stories we tell each other." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "We are a company of analysts," he continued. "We demand data. We demand proof. And yet, in our hallways and break rooms, we often trade in the cheapest, most unreliable currency there is: rumor." He scanned the room, his eyes pausing for a fraction of a second on Ava before moving on. "We create entire narratives out of scraps of information. We pass judgment without evidence. This doesn't just damage morale, it actively poisons the trust this company is built on. It kills productivity, and it makes good people want to leave." He talked about the weight of leadership and the loneliness that often comes with it. He talked about how easy it is to mistake a person's motives when you only see a tiny piece of the picture. He never mentioned a divorce, he never mentioned a marketing project, and he never, ever said Ava's name. He simply held up a mirror to the entire organization, forcing them to look at the quiet toxicity they had all, in some way, allowed to grow. "A healthy culture," he finished, "isn't one where no one makes mistakes. It's one where we have the courage to find the truth and the grace to offer each other understanding." As Mr. Finch finished his speech, a profound silence hung in the air. This was the moment. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. She could stay quiet. He had given her an out. No one else would ever have to know it was her. But if she stayed silent, his lesson and her own painful journey would be for nothing. Her legs felt like they were filled with sand, but she forced herself to stand.
She walked the long aisle to the microphone in the center of the room. Hundreds of faces turned to watch her. She could feel Daniel's eyes on her, a steadying presence. She took a deep, shaky breath. "Hi," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "My name is Ava. I'm a junior analyst, and a few weeks ago, I sprayed an unkind and untrue story about Mr. Finch." A collective gasp swept through the room. "I did it because I felt small, and for a moment, it made me feel big," she continued, looking not at the audience, but directly at Alistair Finch on the stage. "I didn't try to find the truth. I didn't think about the person behind the title. I just repeated a rumor, and I contributed to the exact culture of distrust that Mr. Finch just talked about. What he did today, by addressing the problem without naming the person who caused it, was an act of grace. What I did was an act of cowardice." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm sorry to Mr. Finch for the disrespect I showed him, and I'm sorry to all of you for failing to live up to the standard we should expect from each other. People deserve to be known for who they are, not for the stories we make up about them." She let go of the microphone and turned to walk back to her seat, her entire body shaking. The silence was absolute. And then a single person started clapping. It was Daniel. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire room, led by a small, appreciative nod from Alistair Finch, erupted in applause. It wasn't applause for her mistake, it was for her courage in owning it.
In the weeks after the meeting, something really did shift. The atmosphere in the office, once thick with whispered secrets, started to feel lighter, more open. Inspired by Ava's public apology, people started talking to each other instead of about each other. With Mr. Finch's full backing, Ava implemented one of the key ideas from her report, a section in the company-wide newsletter called Positive Gossip. Each week, it featured anonymous kudos where employees could celebrate a colleague who had helped them out or inspired them. It was a simple change, but it had a ripple effect, actively rewarding respect and recognition. The whispers didn't disappear, but they changed. Now you were more likely to overhear, "Did you see the props Sarah got for that presentation?" than speculation about someone's personal life. Ava's own story became a quiet company legend, a cautionary tale, but also an inspirational one. She was no longer an outcast. She was respected, not because she was perfect, but because she had been brave enough to be imperfect in public. Her connection with Daniel blossomed in this new, healthier place. Late-night work sessions turned into weekend dinners. Talks about corporate culture evolved into talks about their dreams and their futures. Their relationship was built on a foundation of total honesty. One evening, months later, as they were walking out of the office together, he took her hand. "You know," he said, looking at her with an admiration that still made her heart flutter, "the way you stood up at that microphone, that was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. That's the real you." Ava smiled, lacing her fingers through his. "You helped me find her," she said softly. "You showed me what real strength looks like." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maybe we can be strong together then." It wasn't really a question. It was a gentle statement of fact. And as she looked into his kind, honest eyes, Ava knew this was the truest story of all. A love story that didn't start with a fairy tale, but with a humiliating mistake, a painful truth, and the beautiful, redemptive power of a second chance. Conclusion. Words have power. A careless whisper can shatter a reputation and poison a workplace. It can turn colleagues into strangers and build walls of distrust. Gossip is so often born from our own insecurities, a broken attempt to feel like we belong by making someone else the outsider. But this story is a reminder that there's a much more powerful force: courage. The courage to admit when you're wrong, the courage to seek the truth instead of just spreading a story, the courage to offer empathy instead of anger, and the courage to grant second chances. Love and respect aren't built on secrets. They're forged in honesty, vulnerability, and the shared, beautiful struggle of trying to be a little better today than we were yesterday. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, comment with your own thoughts on the power of words, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.